Hey riders, Eric Lang with Ride Adventures here, and today with me, fortunately, our Director of Training, Andrew Murray, also a lead instructor. We're going to be talking through actually the Ducati Desert X that Andrew's been riding for a while, a bike we have not yet introduced into touring and renting operations. Maybe going to give it a first year and make sure those bikes are okay, but it seems to be going well, and so maybe you'll start to see those as being offered in our rental and touring offerings. So, Andrew, say hi.
Yeah, and hi, Eric. And before we get into the bike, I just want to talk real briefly about some of the successes we've had here at this new facility in Bend. Sure. In our training. This last summer, we had 92 students come through, and I've been reading all of the feedback from all of the surveys that we've put out. So I'm just really proud of the team that we've put together. It's been great working with you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and do what we've done.
We got a good thing going and even more of it ahead. So we already have our schedule on the website for 2024.
We have open, so if someone's looking to do training, as we're going into winter now, we have schedules in Las Vegas, and we've just announced our 2024 Bend schedule that starts up in May.
Yeah, so check that out on our website and grab a spot while they're available.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. But this Ducati you've been riding, and that a lot of riders seem to be riding and enjoying. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of experience on the KTM 890R. I had two of those. I've probably got 15,000 miles on those, and I've got about 30,000 miles on the big GSs, the 1200 and 1250 GS, and they're both are awesome bikes. But I got to say that the Ducati Desert X is really different and unique in a lot of ways. I really, really like it. I think this is going to be. I'm notorious for not keeping bikes very long, but I think this is going to be a keeper. I just upped for a 7-year warranty on the bike, so I'm planning on keeping it for a while.
Wow.
Yeah,
I like it too, just based on some of the stats we should bounce through here, but just when you look at the amount of suspension travel and ground clearance and power and
it's right in there in the sort of the top of the heap, if you will, of the mid-size adventure bikes. And power-wise, it's 110 horsepower. That's more than any of the mid-size adventure bikes have right now. It's even more than a Africa Twin, which I think you could argue, is that a mid-size adventure bike or is that a full-size adventure bike?
Heavyweight, over 500 pounds, I say.
Yeah, but it's it's a 937cc motor. It's the Desmodromic valve train. It's a V-twin, so it allows for a very narrow and very low center of gravity, 68 foot-pounds of torque. Some other key specs, it's a 21 and 18-inch front and rear wheel set, so it's a very legitimate off-road wheel set.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's amazing really how well the bike handles on the road, with a 21-inch wheel set. I think every review you're going to see on this bike, people say the same thing. They can't believe that they're riding a bike with a 21-inch front wheel on the road. It has a full suite of electronics, ride modes. It's got all the ride modes you need. Great thing about the ride modes is they're very configurable. They're user configurable. So as the bike comes from the factory, the ride modes are set up. There's a wet weather ride mode where the power is, dialed back, and a more sensitive ABS and more sensitive traction control. And there's two off-road modes. There's enduro and rally that have different settings. But
how's the switchability between them? Sorry to cut you.
Super easy.
Not a huge menu system where you're going.
Yeah, it's the same button. You push it. Basically, you hold the button down and then you push it again to lock in the ride mode. So I've had the KTM 890R. I've got a lot of experience on that bike, and I would probably say that menu system might be the best of anyone that's out there. But
the KTM or the Ducati?
Yeah, the KTM.
Oh, okay.
And I'd say the Ducati is right there with it. They do the same thing a little bit differently, but compared to say the Triumph and some of the other bikes that where you have a setting and then you lose it when you turn the key off, or you're fiddling with a lot of different buttons. It's very straightforward. And, other key features, got a great quick shifter. It's very intuitive, very easy to use, very smooth, a lot smoother than the quick shifter on, say, the GS. Has a slipper clutch, roughly 9 inches of travel. I think it's 8.7 in the rear and 9.1 in the front. So I just call it 9 inches of travel.
Okay.
5.5 gallons of fuel capacity, gives you about 250 miles of range. Comes in at about 492 pounds wet.
Which puts it to me in that middle weight range that fortunately a lot more manufacturers are introducing bikes into that category.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, the 890R is really close weight-wise. I think it's like 485 or something, like 485 or full with fuel and everything like that. So it's very similar. The 890 for sure carries its weight better than I think any bike that's out there because it's got
slung fuel tanks.
It's got those low slung fuel tanks.
Saddlebags, as we once called them, right? Yeah.
But you know, really the Ducati is it carries its weight really, really well. You can kind of notice a difference in some slow speed maneuvering, but it's still it's an easy bike to pick up. I've had to pick it up a couple times, and you know, it carries its weight really, really well.
Lots of reasons to like it. Let's go down that list of pros. What do you think makes the list of pros on this bike?
So the first pro I'm going to talk about, I think really is, it could be a pro and it could be a con, depending on what you're looking to do with the bike, how you like to ride. But a really unique feature of the bike is the wheelbase. The wheelbase is 4 inches longer than a GS 1200 or 1250. It's about 3 inches longer than a KTM 890R. It's about 3 inches longer than, say, a Tiger 900 Rally Pro. And you definitely feel that. You definitely notice it. A similar bike in geometry really is the T7. And I think if someone has ridden a T7 off-road and really likes the way it's very stable, it's very intuitive, the way it handles sand really, really well. And the Ducati is a lot like that. You definitely feel you're on a bike that is longer in wheelbase, is more stable.
Probably more comfortable.
Yeah,
in terms
definitely.
in terms of what it absorbs and how the suspension reacts to everything. To me, I would think a longer wheelbase.
For sure. You know, I was thinking about ways to sort of summarize or sort of, you know, how I would describe the bike. And one of it is I think it's like the ultimate BDR machine, backcountry discovery route machine. You know, I've done 3 BDRs now on my BMW GS. You know, that's a great bike, especially you get on the road, man, it just eats up miles. And it's still really pretty good off-road. But in terms of sort of that all-day comfort, riding off-road terrain, you know, whether it's washboard or it's rocky terrain or sandy on and off or just forest roads and gravel roads, it's just so comfortable. It's relaxing. You can push it hard and have a lot of fun with it, or you can kind of dial it back and just relax and cover miles, I think. And
rake and trail, we're talking maybe a couple of stats down there.
Yeah, so, you know, it's funny, as I looked up some of the rake stats for some of the other bikes. And that's unique also. You know, the rake on the Ducati is 27.6 degrees, right? That's longer than a KTM 890, which is like 25 and some change. It's longer than the BMW. It's definitely longer than the Tiger 900 Rally Pro, which is like 24.6. And I have only a little bit of experience on a Tiger, but you know, if you read the reviews, one of the things that people say about it is when you get that bike off-road, it's a little bit more twitchy.
As a bike will be on or off-road, anytime the rake is steeper, shall we say, it's always going to be a little more twitchy. Right?
Yeah. You know, once again, a bike that's similar in that geometry is the Tenere 700. And every time I've gotten on one at our training facility out here, you know, going through the sand pit, I just noticed right away that bike feels very stable. It's very easy. If you look at the rake on the Tenere, it's 27 degrees. I think there's a lot of things that feels a lot better than a Tenere. I think it holds its weight better than a Tenere. It's definitely got more power. It has the ride modes. And
there's a lot more power, as the next point here says, and as I think you already mentioned, 110 horsepower.
Yeah, I mean, that's the top of the heap for the middleweights.
Yeah, I think Africa Twins currently are around 105, and that's heavyweight. That's 530 or 40 pounds or something like that. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as I was saying, I was thinking of like things that are unique about the bike that really set it apart. And I think one of the words you have to bring into play is character. I mean, the engine really has...
Sounds great.
It sounds great. Even with the stock exhaust, it sounds great. A good friend of mine has the same bike, but with Ducati's upgraded exhaust system, which is expensive as hell, but that bike sounds amazing with that exhaust system. At my age, I like a quiet bike. Okay.
No heavy metal.
I like to be able to get off it without my ears ringing. Yeah. No heavy metal, no ringing ears. But it still sounds great. and it sounds, there's just something about the sound and the feel when you get above 6,000 RPMs, it's almost becomes yet another motor. It's just really fun and exciting.
And not just the sound, but to me, the reverberations coming through V-twin. I love the parallel twins on the T7 and the 890 and stuff like that, but the Vs are always going to be special to me.
Yeah,
it's
some
extra little pulsation coming through the bike and through you, and that feedback and everything. It's just
and very smooth, really across the RPM band. From the low end all the way up. It's very smooth. You feel a little more sort of low frequency vibrations at the below 3,000 RPMs. Not annoying. But cruising 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 RPMs at high speed on the road, it's very smooth in the feet, in the hands. Yeah.
It says here optional auxiliary fuel tank. I didn't hear about that.
And so another one of these pro and cons. So you can option the bike with an extra 2 gallons of fuel, and that sits right back, kind of where you're set, about where a set of panniers would sit, which is interesting because the auxiliary fuel option is not compatible with any pannier racks. Really, if you want to put luggage on the bike, it's going to have to be a rackless system. It's a cool option if what you want to do is just really long range riding and you have, some kind of alternative for your luggage, because then you go from about 250 mile range to about 350 mile range.
The build quality, Ducati, I think.
I think that's another thing you notice. Like if you've been on a KTM, if you've been on other bikes, you'll notice right away the build quality. I mean, everything, all the fasteners are really high quality. All the plastic is really heavy duty. And it's like, when you're taking the plastic panels on and off, which I've done because I've put some accessories on it and done some mods, it's really high quality plastic. You feel the difference.
Things line up again.
Things line up. Yeah. You take stuff apart and you put it back on. It's all lined up. Pretty easy to work on for the most part.
Came standard with some features?
The standard bike comes with Ducati's full suite of ride modes. So unlike some other bikes, you have to pay extra to get extra ride modes. You get it fully equipped with all the ride modes. Cruise control is standard. A couple of things that aren't standard are heated grips.
It would be a different price if it did, though.
and they're not cheap. But and it's a well-equipped, ready-to-run bike. The suspension on is fully adjustable. There's a new version coming out that's got an even higher spec suspension with more travel. But as the bike comes equipped, the standard bike, you have rebound and compression dampening adjustments, front and rear, preload front and rear, so you can really dial it in.
Play with the clickers and get it dialed in.
Yeah.
New suspension coming out you mean for the next model year or an entirely different version?
In 2024, they're coming out with a rally version that'll have I believe it's about another inch of travel and just like I said, a higher spec front and rear suspension and slightly different wheels. It'll go from tubeless to tubed.
Interesting.
So the rally model, they call it, is more robust.
Meant to possibly be pounded like a rally bike would. And so in that situation, you don't want the risk of denting
exactly
a tubeless rim.
But, the standard bike comes with tubeless, which is nice. What's really unique about the bike for how good it is off-road, and it is really good off-road, is just how good it is on-road. I mean, the first time I hopped on one of these, I was actually bringing my friend's bike back from Portland. We were coming back. I was on my GS and he was on his brand new DDX. And we switched for a while going up this canyon towards Olali Lake. I mean, it just feels so good and so natural and so fun on the road. My term for it is upright sport bike.
Yeah, great seating position. You can ride it all day long.
Yeah, a guy my age, I don't want to be leaned over with clip-ons and a real low. Really, really sporty, really fun. More fun on the road certainly than my GS. This Desert X is just as comfortable on the road as a GS.
Think with the 19-inch front wheel on the GS, I would tend to think that's an immediate advantage. The 21, I understand it's great this one's good on the pavement, but to me a 21 is always going to walk a little bit more in those turns, and the 19 of the GS wants to bite down a little bit more and turn better. But hey,
I think the bike handles just as good as the GS. It's just as comfortable. It's just as fun. I think it's actually more fun. And I'm talking about a GS, not a GSA. As if you're on a GSA, you've got more wind coverage, and that's, I think, a better sort of multi-state tour. And if you want to put two people and a ton of luggage on it, I think a GS or a GSA is probably a better bike.
Sure, a bigger bike,
But,
typically better carrying
that's not going to
capacity.
happen with my bike.
Yeah,
I'll put luggage on it, but it's not for two-up touring. I think it's an awesome bike. It's not for everyone. I don't think any bike is, but I mean, there's some things we talked about. I said in the beginning that I thought the geometry was sort of a pro and a con. That longer wheelbase and the longer rake makes the bike very stable. It feels almost like cheating in sand. I mean, literally, it is so stable in sand.
I suppose that's another situation where the longer wheelbase probably does feel good.
Yeah, for sure.
Take some of the twitch out of the whole thing.
But at the same time, I know guys that, I got a couple friends on 890Rs and they're really good riders. They're really aggressive riders and they ride really hard. And, this bike is not quite as quick turning, I would say. Yeah, I mean, if I was going to go try and pick my way through a, bouldered up rock garden, I might be a little more comfortable on an 890R. It's just the steering's just a little more nimble and precise. Mm-hmm. Another really cool thing about the bike is the enduro ride mode brings it down to 70 or 75 horsepower. And I've even heard some interviews with some like pro level riders and a factory rider for Ducati that actually prefers riding it off-road in that 75 horsepower mode. And the bike just feels really, really at home, natural. And you can go into rally mode, and that's your off-road mode with full power. Yeah, I think it's a great bike for someone that doesn't have a lot of experience off-road with a big bike. And I think it's a great bike for someone that's got a lot of experience,
Caters to the notion that when would we need over 100 horsepower off-road in the dirt? It's you're breaking traction at some point, folks. So it's like, there's good reason to be comfortable with 75. Last pro about this bike that we put down was the looks of it. And
I mean, its looks is subjective to me. It's a really good-looking Italian adventure pasta rocket.
That's right. It is.
Yeah, it's very, very unique. I mean, it turns heads and just it's a sort of a different configuration than a lot of the bikes that are out there.
Turns heads because of that sound too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we got a few cons to mention here. First is that cost factor. Let's get it out of the way, folks. This is not the cheapest bike.
It is not the cheapest
bike. It also doesn't
look
like or perform like the cheapest bike. So
might be the most expensive bike in the class if you look at
in the middleweights. Yeah,
for the middleweights, right? Yeah. It's certainly more expensive than a 890R or a Norden 901, even a Norden Expedition 901.
Depending on what country you're in around the world, these prices change around the world, but at least here in the U.S.
Accessories for it are not cheap either. The Ducati accessories are, I don't know where they're coming from on some of their prices, but
maybe go with some aftermarket.
That auxiliary fuel tank option is like $2,500.
Wow.
The heated grips, the parts are about almost $400, and it's about $450 to install them at the dealer. You can't do it yourself because there's some kind of software switch that only the Ducati dealers can do.
Oh, wow.
The upgraded exhaust, this is crazy. The upgraded exhaust is like $4,500.
Is that a misprint? Because wow, that's,
that includes
a remapping of the.
It includes a remapping,
which is a lot of work,
and includes a decat, and it includes a really nice, sexy exhaust. It sounds awesome. It adds legitimately 7 to 10 horsepower to the bike, so it's not just for looks and sound. But yeah, it's $4,500.
Another con we mentioned outside of the price was the long wheelbase makes it not quite as nimble. We were talking about that,
I was talking. I've had some conversations with some folks about the pros and cons, and they say, "Well, Andrew, you're saying it's kind of a contradiction. Is the wheelbase a pro or a con?" And I would say that if you're used to or you like a bike that handles like the 890R, that's very precise, very nimble, quick steering, probably takes a little more energy and effort and thought to really keep it online, then that longer wheelbase might not be the bike that lights you on fire, And
depends on the rider, depends on the terrain, the situation,
right.
Personal preferences.
I mean, I can honestly say after owning an 890 and a 1200 and 1250 and the Ducati, if you sent me out for several days on mixed, BDR style terrain, there's no bike I'd rather do it than on this Desert X.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
All right. The air filter, not so easy to get at.
Everyone that knows about this bike knows about the air filter. That big white tank needs to come completely off to change the air filter.
Once you've done it a couple times, it's 5 minutes, right?
I don't think it's 5 minutes. There's a guy on YouTube that's got a video out that claims he can do it in 25 minutes. It takes me 25 minutes to find the tools, So, that's an issue. I think, if I had made a habit of riding in really dusty conditions, at the back of a group, I might rethink that, right? Because you're gonna eat a lot of dust. Now the intake is up high; it's not prone to sucking a lot of dust, and apparently it's really well protected. When I do my first air filter change, there's an aftermarket air filter that just sort of has longer service life, if you will. It's just got more media in it to last longer. That's an issue.
But the air intake is up high, you said. So in the case of a river crossing, water crossing, or something like that, you've got more than a foot or so of.
Right. So the maintenance of the air filter is an issue, and a number of things are. Like, for instance, if you want to do your own service, you can't turn off the service light. So it needs a dealer to turn off the service light when the service light comes on. Now, the flip side of that is pretty long service intervals. After your first 600-mile service, then you go 6,000 miles for your first service.
It's pretty good.
Your first valve adjustment, which is not cheap because it's a desmodromic. First, the tank's got to come off, and then it's more money to do those.
What mileage is that at, though?
That's at 18,000.
Okay.
So for some people, there's people that ride their bike 1,000 miles a year.
Yeah, it could be. Maybe you never even do them.
I'm not one of those, but
right.
And I think in the same vein, let's take into account that there's not as many Ducati dealers around. I think my experience with Ducati in North America on some other issues unrelated to this bike has been very positive. I think there's some great dealers out there, but there's not as many of them. Here in Bend, it's almost 3 hours to Moto Corsa, which is the Portland dealer. So that's an issue. The flip side is it's a super dependable, reliable motor.
And then hopefully all the electronics, not having to find that dealer to plug it in and remap or find an error code or whatever. In a lot of those situations, all it means is you have to look at the light on the dashboard for a while.
Sure.
Like what was the other example we were talking about? Just turning off service lights. If you do your own oil change and Ducati doesn't turn off the light, then at some
point you got to drive by a dealer and have them turn it off.
Yeah.
And I'm not seeing anything on the Ducati Facebook group that looks like, a lot of people having trouble with electronics and other things like that. There's a couple issues. I think there's been some issues around some of the brake rotors warping prematurely.
On the Ducati?
Yeah, and they're replacing those pretty quickly. So
rotors warping. That could have
but other than
to do
that,
with what the riders themselves did to it.
I haven't seen any mention of, my screen shut down, or the key immobilizers disabled the bike, all kinds of weird little electronic gremlins that seem to hit some of the other bikes.
We already mentioned before that if you do get the auxiliary fuel tank, it's not going to work with rack system like we have.
So I have the Outback MotorTech racks on there, but no one right now has a production rack that will hold panniers that will fit on the bike with the auxiliary tanks. When you think about it, it's kind of funny, right? Well, we're going to give you an extra 100 miles of range, but you can't bring any stuff with you. Someone's probably going to come up with a solution for that. And you can always throw rackless. The auxiliary tanks actually make a rackless system fit better on it. The rear end of the bike, a lot of people comment on the rear end of the bike. It's in its stock trim. It's very skinny. It's very minimalistic in the back. In fact, the bike doesn't even come with any tail rack. Most of the adventure bikes have got like a small tail rack, and a lot of guys, myself included, usually put a bigger one on there. The only thing back there is a steel, sort of loop that you can grab the bike to move it around with.
You get a little bit of buffeting, or somebody else?
Yeah, so I don't think it's any worse or any better than most of the other bikes. I think it's better than some of the earlier generation KTMs.
Is the windscreen adjustable?
The windscreen is not adjustable. There's a number of different sized screens available. There's 2 different screens available from Ducati, but then now Puig and WRS and a handful of other companies have got aftermarket screens. I'm running the WRS touring sized screen. It's a little bit better than the stock one, but I'm 6'1". I sit kind of tall in the saddle and forward usually when I ride. And at freeway speed, I get some buffeting. I've got a little clip-on deflector that if I'm doing a lot of highway, then I
top there.
Yeah, I put it on the top of the screen, and that really quiets it down.
Buffeting is such a sort of subjective thing. It's like depends on the rider's height, their torso versus their legs. Right? Are you a long torso or short?
Absolutely.
Are you wearing a helmet with a peak?
Yeah.
Which windscreen? Which wind direction. There's so much that goes into that. And then again, it just might happen between a certain speed, sort of a low end where it comes on and a high end where it probably disappears a little for you.
Yeah, for sure. But I would say in terms of weather protection, I came over here. It's 10 miles to our studio from my house, and it was really miserable weather this morning. It was cold and it was drizzly and rainy. You're well protected. My sort of all my upper chest area and stuff was pretty much protected from the rain, and it's comfortable.
Requires engine guards to prevent tank damage.
I'm sure a lot of people that are looking at the Desert X are also thinking about an 890R, and I think that's one of the great advantages that 890R is, or the 890 in general, is that thing can fall down all day long and not really get scratched or hurt or dented without any additional protection.
The original skid plate probably not so great, but
depending on how you ride. If you're riding hard, you'd want to beef your skid plate on an 890. But and likewise with the Desert X, it benefits from a larger skid plate. You're almost certainly going to dent the tank if you don't have an engine guard on it, sort of an engine or crash bar on it, and it falls over.
Expensive tank, I would guess, based on some of the other numbers we've seen.
Maybe
here, so.
I don't know. Maybe it'd come down on the plastics. I'm not sure, but if you think you're ever going to drop that bike, you want engine guards.
Good idea.
Yeah.
The suspension could be too soft for heavy or aggressive riders.
That's kind of a common thing with pretty much every midsize, but in particular, people have found it to be soft. I weigh 200 pounds when I add, my basic day riding gear, which is a toolkit and boots and helmet. If I put bags on it, I won't have enough preload clicks left to get it back to a 30% sag.
They probably, came from the factory with springs for somebody 30 pounds less than you, and then, like you said, depending on what you're adding to it.
Yeah, and if
respringing your bike might be a good idea for heavy riders.
I think if you're a heavy rider, you probably want to respring it. If you're a heavy and really aggressive rider, you might want to respring it and reshock it. Put new rear shock.
Talk through some of the accessories that you think have been best for you anyway.
Yeah, sure. So I did a bit of research, talked to different people, and to make sure that what I was putting on there was compatible, worked well. My key things are I want it to be functional but lightweight. The Adventure Spec engine guards they're light and they're really strong. They're definitely stronger, more robust than the OEM bars, and they're cheaper. There's also a water pump guard on my bike and a GPS mount from Adventure Spec. Perun Moto rear tail rack fits really well on this bike. Their version 2 is also compatible with a lot of racks. So you want to make sure that if you're putting pannier racks and a tail rack on the bike, that they're compatible.
Sure.
So I've got the Outback Mototech pannier racks. I really like those. They're fairly light. They're robust. They're made out of steel that's easy to weld and repair if it ever came to that. I run the Giant Loop Mototech soft panniers with the quick release mount. They're easy on, easy off, and that's sort of my day riding setup. They're real small and lightweight, and they're adjustable. You can put more gear in them too if you need. And then I also have, on the same pannier racks fit, the TourTech Zega Evo hard panniers, which are nice for touring and if I'm staying on the pavement.
Probably more on-road.
Yeah, I don't like to go off-road with hard panniers. But and I mentioned the WRS touring screen. I also have the WRS side panels that give you a little bit of extra sort of upper body protection from the wind. I really like the Wunderlich tank bag that I have on there. It's made specifically for the Desert X. Fits real nice. It's super easy on and off.
Stays in position.
Yeah. Nice thing about the bike is there's a switched accessory wire loop under, in the headlight area. So if you're putting on a GPS or something like that, you've got a nice already wired in switch.
Well, that's a good list of things to go through, hopefully helping some folks decide if this is the bike for them.
Yeah, I think it's a terrific bike. I've really enjoyed it. I'm still pretty new on it. I got to say, I've had it for about 3 months. I've got about 1,500 miles on it. It's just a terrific bike. I've had a lot of different ones, and this one's really special.
I'm glad to see another manufacturer enter the adventure bike scene.
For sure.
Mistaken Ducati did not have that before. And
not legitimately.
Yeah, and
the Desert Sled, I don't know if you could call that an adventure bike.
The Multistrada was sort of, but not. I think it was a 17-inch front or something. Not quite. But great to see Ducati in there, and nice job Ducati entering into that more middleweight category. Still love the Harley Pan America, for example, but they entered the market in that super heavyweight category with the big old Pan American. So this is going to be a bike that a lot of riders are going to enjoy, I think. So.
Yeah.
Well, ask questions if you have them in the comments below, folks. Thanks, Andrew, for joining me.
Hey, you're welcome. This is great.
Telling us about your new bike. And thanks for watching, everyone. Right on. See you out there.